Think about the last time you had nothing to do. No deadline, no obligation, no one who needed you. Just open, unstructured time, and know where it had to go. Most people would call that a perfect day. But inside your body, something different was happening. Your cortisol levels were rising. Your immune system was pulling back. The rate at which your cells were aging was accelerating. You weren't resting. You were beginning to break down. Researchers have known for decades that humans without a sense of purpose don't just feel worse. They die sooner. Not from one identifiable disease. Not in ways medicine can easily explain or treat. In ways that look, from the outside, almost like a choice. This isn't philosophy. This is biology. And the deeper you go into the science, the stranger it gets, because what the data keeps pointing to is that your body was never designed to exist without a reason. In the winter of 1944, a psychiatrist named Viktor Frankl was a prisoner in the Nazi concentration camp at Auschwitz. He had already lost his wife, his parents, and almost everything he had ever built. What he had left was something much harder to take away. He was trained to watch people die, and he was watching very carefully. What Frankl noticed over those months was not random. The prisoners who survived longest were not always the strongest physically. They were not always the youngest or the healthiest. The ones who lasted, he wrote, were the ones who had something to live for, a person they were trying to get back to, an unfinished manuscript, a question they still needed to answer, a reason. The prisoners who lost that could die within days, not from starvation alone, not from disease alone. Their bodies seemed to make a decision. Frankl spent the rest of his life turning that observation into a medical theory. He called it logotherapy, the idea that meaning is not a luxury, it is a biological necessity, that the human organism, stripped of purpose, does not fail in any one identifiable way. It fails everywhere at once. At the time, the medical establishment treated this as philosophy. It sounded too soft to be science, too abstract to be testable. Then the data started coming in. In 2014, a psychologist named Patrick Hill at Carleton University published a study in psychological science that tracked more than 6,000 Americans over 14 years. He wasn't measuring happiness. He wasn't measuring stress. He was measuring one specific thing: how strongly each participant agreed with statements like, "I have a sense of direction and purpose in my life." Then he waited and counted who died. The results were not ambiguous. People who reported a strong sense of life purpose were significantly less likely to die from any cause over the study period, not from one specific disease. From everything: heart disease, cancer, respiratory failure. The data didn't care what mechanism killed them. Purpose appeared to protect against all of it. A 15% lower risk of death, across all causes, across all ages. Hill repeated the finding across multiple age groups, and it held every time. Young adults, middle-aged adults, people over 65. The protection didn't depend on how old you were, or what you did for a living, or how much money you had. But here's what's strange. Hill wasn't measuring whether people were happy. He wasn't measuring whether their lives were successful by any external standard. He was measuring whether they felt their life had a direction. That was the variable, a direction. For a long time, researchers assumed this was a behavioral effect. People with purpose exercise more. They eat better. They sleep better. They have closer relationships. Of course they live longer, but that's only half the story. Because when scientists started looking at what was happening inside the bodies of people who lacked purpose, they found something that had nothing to do with behavior. They found inflammation. Chronic, low-grade, systemic inflammation, the same condition now understood to be a root driver of heart disease, cancer, diabetes, and Alzheimer's. Not an infection, not an injury. Just a body running its own emergency response against a threat that doesn't exist yet because it has been signaled continuously that something is wrong. The signal is cortisol. When humans perceive that their environment is unpredictable, that there is no clear direction, no goal to move toward, the brain interprets this as danger. Cortisol floods the system. In the short term, this is useful. It prepares you to respond. But when it runs chronically, when there is no goal on the horizon and no reason for the alarm to stop, cortisol begins to damage the very systems it was designed to protect. It shrinks the hippocampus. It suppresses immune function. It accelerates the rate at which cells age and break down. In 2011, researcher Carissa Lowe at the University of Pittsburgh found something even more specific. She measured telomere length, the protective caps on the ends of chromosomes that determine how fast your cells age, and cross-referenced them with life purpose scores in a group of adults. People with a strong sense of purpose had longer telomeres. Not by a little. The difference was measurable and consistent. Purpose was, at the chromosomal level, slowing down the rate at which their bodies were aging. Your body doesn't know the difference between a predator and an empty calendar. Both register as the same signal. No direction, no reason to be here. Something is wrong. In 2007, a team of Japanese researchers published a study in the British Medical Journal that had been running for 7 years. They had tracked 43,000 Japanese adults, all of them middle-aged, and asked a single question at the start. Do you feel you have Ikigai? Ikigai is a Japanese word without a clean translation. Roughly, it means reason for being. Iki is life, Gai is worth, the thing that makes it worth getting up. The researchers waited. Then they counted who was still alive. The people who said they had Ikigai were significantly more likely to still be living 7 years later, significantly less likely to have died from cardiovascular disease, less likely to have died from stroke. The association held even after controlling for smoking, drinking, exercise, and every other lifestyle variable the researchers could measure. The protective variable wasn't diet, it wasn't fitness, it wasn't geography. It was whether they had a reason to get up in the morning. This finding echoes what researcher Dan Buettner had been tracking across 5 regions of the world he called blue zones: Okinawa in Japan, Sardinia in Italy, Nicoya in Costa Rica, Ikaria in Greece, and Loma Linda in California, the highest concentrations of people who live past 100 on Earth. All 5 share overlapping factors: strong community ties, regular movement built into daily life, low chronic stress, and every single one has a cultural framework for purpose that doesn't expire with age, a role that makes the older you get, the more valuable you become. In Okinawa, the word retirement has no direct cultural equivalent. You don't stop being needed. You just need different things. In most of the Western world, you get a party, a gold watch, and no one needs you anymore. And here is where the science starts to sound like something else entirely. Because what all of this is pointing to isn't that purpose is psychologically beneficial. It's that your body uses purpose as a signal that you are embedded in a system that requires you, that the future is a place worth moving toward, that resources should be invested in keeping this body functional rather than slowly shutting it down. When Viktor Frankl watched prisoners die in Auschwitz, he believed they were dying of meaninglessness. He was right, but perhaps not in the way he fully understood at the time. Their bodies weren't giving up. Their bodies were responding rationally to every piece of information available. No role to fill, no future that requires this organism, no signal to keep going. Stand down. And here's the part nobody talks about. Your body cannot evaluate whether your life is actually meaningful. It cannot assess your relationships or your work or your goals from the outside and determine they are objectively worthy. It has no access to that kind of judgment. All it can read is the signal. Are you moving towards something? Is there a direction? Is there a reason to get up tomorrow? If yes, allocate resources, repair cells, keep the immune system online, hold aging slow. If no, the signal is the same as it was in Auschwitz. Begin standing down. Viktor Frankl had a name for what he observed in his peacetime patients. He called it the existential vacuum, the emptiness that descends when the structure of daily obligation falls away. He saw it most on weekends, on holidays, the moments when no one needed anything from you and you had no direction to move in. His patients described it as unbearable, not painful the way grief is painful, more like nothing, like being switched off while still awake. The modern version of this is not hard to find. Studies on retirement consistently show a spike in mortality in the first 2 years after leaving work, particularly among men who built their identity around their careers. Not from the diseases of old age, from everything, from the generalized collapse that happens when the signal stops. The same pattern appears in the data on widowhood. Losing a spouse significantly raises your risk of dying in the following year. Not just from grief in any romantic sense, from the disappearance of a role. The person who needed you is gone, and with them, one of the primary signals that told your body to keep going. The irony is that most modern cultures treat purposelessness as the goal. The fantasy sold to people across their entire working lives is that one day you will have enough money, enough time, enough freedom to finally stop, to finally have nothing you have to do. But your biology was never designed for finally. It was designed for forward. For hundreds of thousands of years, the question of why you were here was never something you had to answer. It was answered by the people around you who needed you, by the work that would go undone if you didn't do it, by the simple fact of being embedded in a world that required your presence. We built a civilization that removed every one of those requirements, solved every immediate survival problem, automated every task that once gave a human life its shape, and then handed you a blank calendar and called it freedom. Your body is still waiting for the signal. The question isn't what you want to do with your life. The question your body is asking, at the chromosomal level, in the cortisol flooding your bloodstream, in the inflammation quietly building in your arteries, is simpler than that. Is there a reason to keep going? For the people who answer yes, the data is clear. Their telomeres are longer, their inflammation is lower, their hearts run cleaner and longer. They age, but slowly, as if their bodies are in no particular hurry to be done. For the ones who can't find an answer, the data is just as clear. It turns out a reason to live was never a luxury. It was always the mechanism.